The oncologist said I had 6 months. Marcus said I had 3 weeks, maybe less, and definitely not enough time to waste on a pointless trip to Italy. Be realistic, Claire, he said, not looking up from his laptop as I sat on our couch with the travel confirmations I'd found in his email. You can barely walk to the mailbox without getting winded. How exactly do you plan to navigate the hills of Tuscany? The irony was that Tuscany had been my dream, not his. I'd been planning our delayed honeymoon for 2 years, ever since my breast cancer diagnosis had derailed our original post-wedding plans. I'd researched every vineyard, every medieval village, every cooking class in the region. I'd learned basic Italian phrases and bookmarked restaurants in guidebooks that were now dog-eared from my hopeful planning. What I hadn't planned on was finding emails between Marcus and his yoga instructor Jessica about how romantic their upcoming trip to Italy would be. You're right, I said, folding the printed confirmations and slipping them into my purse. I probably am too sick to travel. Marcus finally looked up, probably surprised that I'd agreed so easily. I'm glad you're being sensible about this. We can get a refund on most of it, and you can rest here where I can take care of you. Take care of me. The man who'd been working late 4 nights a week for the past 3 months, who'd hired a night nurse so he wouldn't have to wake up when my pain medication wore off, who'd moved into the guest room because my restless sleep was affecting his ability to function at work. Actually, I don't think we can get a refund, I said carefully. Most of these bookings were non-refundable. But don't worry about it. Consider it a lesson learned. Well, that's frustrating, but you're right. Sometimes you have to write these things off. I nodded and went upstairs to pack, listening to him return to whatever he was typing, probably making plans with Jessica for their romantic getaway to the trip I'd planned for us. The thing about being told you have 6 months to live is that it clarifies your priorities remarkably. 6 months ago, discovering my husband's affair would have destroyed me. I would have confronted him, demanded explanations, tried to save our marriage. But when you're facing your own mortality, you realize that some things simply aren't worth the energy. I had, optimistically, 180 days left. I wasn't going to waste a single one of them on a man who thought my death would be an inconvenience to his travel plans. My suitcase was half packed when my phone rang. It was my sister Rachel, calling for our weekly check-in. How are you feeling today? She asked, and I could hear the forced optimism in her voice that had become familiar since my prognosis. I'm feeling like I'm going to Italy, I said, folding my favorite sundress into the suitcase. What do you mean? I mean, Marcus thinks I'm too sick to travel, so I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm taking the honeymoon he planned to give to someone else. There was a long pause. Claire, what are you talking about? I told her about the emails, about Jessica, about Marcus's convenient concern for my health that had never manifested when I was actually sick and needed him. That son of a bitch, Rachel said with feeling. Claire, I'm so sorry, but are you sure traveling alone is a good idea? I mean, what if something happens? Ratch, I'm dying. Something is already happening. The question is whether I want to spend my last months watching my husband pretend to grieve a wife he's already replaced, or whether I want to see the places I've dreamed about my entire life. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning. The flight is at 10 a.m. Tomorrow? Claire, that's really sudden. Everything about dying is sudden, even when you know it's coming. Another pause. And then, do you want company? I could probably get a flight. No, I said, surprising myself with how quickly I answered. This is something I need to do alone. That evening, Marcus noticed my suitcase by the front door. What's that for? He asked, though he didn't sound particularly concerned. I changed my mind about Italy. Now he looked concerned. Claire, we talked about this. You're not strong enough for international travel. You're probably right, but I'm going anyway. That's ridiculous. You could collapse in some foreign country where no one speaks English and you don't know the medical system. What if you have a crisis? Then I'll handle it. The same way I've been handling everything else since you decided my cancer was too inconvenient for your lifestyle. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, probably to protest that he'd been nothing but supportive, but something in my expression stopped him. Fine, he said finally. If you want to be reckless with your health, that's your choice. But don't expect me to drop everything and fly over there to rescue you when you realize you've made a mistake. I wouldn't dream of it, I said. I'm sure you'll be too busy to rescue anyone. He looked at me strangely, as if he couldn't quite figure out what I meant by that. Marcus had always been remarkably obtuse about subtext, which was probably how he'd convinced himself that his affair was subtle. I slept surprisingly well that night, alone in our king-sized bed, for what I knew would be the last time. I woke up feeling more energetic than I had in months, as if the decision to reclaim my own life had given me strength I'd forgotten I possessed. Marcus was already gone when I got up. He'd mentioned something about an early meeting, though I suspected he was avoiding a final confrontation. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Have a safe trip. Call if you need anything." The note felt like a period at the end of a sentence that had been going on too long. The taxi arrived at 7 a.m., and as I watched our house disappear in the rear window, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years: anticipation. For the first time since my diagnosis, I was moving towards something I wanted, rather than away from something I feared. The flight to Rome was long, but peaceful. I'd upgraded to business class using miles I'd been saving for a special occasion. And what occasion was more special than your own liberation? I slept for most of the flight, waking up as we descended through the clouds over the eternal city. Italy in late spring was exactly as beautiful as I'd imagined. The light was golden and soft, the air warm but not oppressive, the landscape rolling past the taxi window like a painting come to life. By the time we reached the small hotel I'd booked in Tuscany, I felt more alive than I had since before my diagnosis. "Benvenuta, Signora Morrison," the hotel manager said as I checked in. His English was accented but excellent. "We are so happy to have you with us. Your husband, he will be joining you soon?" "Actually, it's just me on this trip," I said, and the words felt like freedom. "Ah, una donna coraggiosa, a brave woman. This is wonderful. You will have the most beautiful week." My room overlooked a vineyard that stretched to the horizon, with medieval hilltop towns dotting the landscape in the distance. I stood on the small balcony, breathing in air that smelled of herbs and sunshine, and called Rachel. "I made it," I said when she answered. "And Rach, it's so beautiful I could cry." "How are you feeling? Any problems with the flight?" "I feel better than I have in months." Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I really was too sick to travel. Too sick to stay home and watch him lie to me every day. "Have you heard from him?" One text asking if I arrived safely. I told him yes, and that was it. "Claire, I have to ask, what are you gonna do about the marriage? I mean, when you get back?" I looked out at the vineyard, where workers were tending to the vines with the kind of care that came from generations of practice. "I don't know if I'm going back." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe I'll just stay here. Maybe I'll spend whatever time I have left in a place that makes me happy, instead of a place where I'm just waiting to die." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "You can't be serious." "Why not? My treatment isn't working anyway. The doctors have been pretty clear that we're just buying time at this point. Why shouldn't I spend that time somewhere beautiful?" "Because you have family here, you have friends, you have a life." "Do I? My husband is planning to replace me before I'm even gone. My friends are all so uncomfortable around me that they've stopped calling. My life for the past 2 years has been medical appointments and watching people act like I'm already dead. But your treatment? My treatment is palliative, Rach. It's not going to save me. All it's doing is making me sicker while it buys me a few extra months of feeling terrible. What if I stopped treatment and just felt as good as I could, for as long as I could?" It was the first time I'd said it out loud, though the thought had been growing in my mind for weeks. Every round of chemo left me weaker, sicker, more disconnected from anything that felt like living. What if I chose quality over quantity? "Claire, that's a huge decision. You can't make it while you're emotional about Marcus." "I'm not being emotional, I'm being practical. I have a terminal illness and a husband who's already moved on. Those are facts, not emotions." After we hung up, I sat on my balcony and watched the sun set over the vineyard. Tomorrow, I would visit the medieval village I'd read about, the one with the cooking school, where I'd planned to learn to make fresh pasta. I would taste wines I'd never heard of and eat tomatoes that had been growing in this soil for centuries. Tonight, I would sleep in a bed that smelled like lavender instead of antiseptic, in a room where no one was measuring my remaining time in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Jessica mentioned you might be feeling neglected lately. I hope the trip helps you get some perspective. See you when you get back. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to parse what exactly he thought he was saying. Was this his way of admitting to the affair while making it somehow my fault for feeling neglected? Was he actually so arrogant that he thought I'd gone to Italy to sulk about not getting enough attention? I deleted the message without responding. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, not from pain or nausea, but because I was excited about the day ahead. When was the last time I'd felt excited about anything? I couldn't remember. The cooking class was held in a restored farmhouse kitchen with windows that opened onto herb gardens and olive groves. There were 8 of us in the class: a young couple from Australia, 2 middle-aged friends from Germany, a retired woman from Canada, and me. Today we learned to make the pasta from nothing but flour and eggs, announced our instructor, a woman named Julia, whose hands moved like a dancer's as she demonstrated the technique. In Italy, we say that pasta made with love tastes different from pasta made with just ingredients. I thought about all the meals I'd cooked for Marcus over the years, the elaborate dinner parties I'd hosted, the care I'd put into creating a home that felt warm and welcoming. Had I been making those meals with love or with duty? And what was the difference? As I kneaded the pasta dough, feeling the texture change under my hands from rough and shaggy to smooth and elastic, I realized this was the first time in 2 years that I'd been focused on creating something rather than fighting something. "Brava," Julia said, examining my dough. "You have the touch. This will be beautiful pasta." The simple praise made me smile in a way I hadn't in months. When was the last time someone had praised something I'd done rather than just commented on how well I was handling my illness? We ate our handmade pasta with sauce made from tomatoes grown in the garden outside the kitchen windows, paired with wine from grapes that had been pressed just down the road. It was the best meal I'd had in 2 years, not because the ingredients were extraordinary, but because I'd made it with my own hands in a place where I felt truly alive. "You are traveling alone?" asked Ingrid, one of the German women, as we lingered over our wine. "Yes, just me." "This is brave. I could never travel alone." "I think sometimes being alone is the only way to figure out who you actually are," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "Ah, yes. Sometimes we must leave our normal life to find our real life." That afternoon, I visited the medieval village I'd read about, wandering through narrow stone streets that had been worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. I bought a scarf from a woman who spoke no English but communicated perfectly through smiles and gestures. I sat in a cafe overlooking the valley and drank coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. My phone rang. Marcus again. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "How's Italy?" he asked, and I could hear traffic in the background, probably driving to meet Jessica for lunch. "It's perfect." "Good, good. Listen, I've been thinking about what you said before you left, about feeling neglected. Maybe when you get back we could plan some time together. A weekend somewhere local, something that wouldn't be too taxing." "That's thoughtful of you," I said, watching an elderly couple share gelato at the table next to me. They were holding hands and laughing at something one of them had said, completely absorbed in each other's company. "So you'd be interested in that? Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you love me?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What kind of question is that? Of course I love you. You're my wife." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you love me. Not if you love the idea of being married, or if you love the life we built together, or if you love the person I used to be before I got sick. Do you love me, as I am right now?" There was a long pause. "Claire, you're being dramatic. Of course I love you. When was the last time you looked forward to seeing me?" "What?" "When was the last time you came home from work, excited to tell me about your day? When was the last time you suggested we do something together because you wanted to spend time with me, not because you felt obligated?" "I don't understand why you're asking these questions. Because I want to know if you're going to miss me when I'm gone, or if you're just going to miss the idea of having been married." Another pause, longer this time. "You're scaring me, Claire. You're talking like you're planning to die tomorrow. I'm not planning to die tomorrow. I'm planning to live today. Those are different things. After we hung up, I sat in the cafe for another hour, watching the life of the village unfold around me. Children walked home from school, stopping to pet a dog or chase pigeons in the square. Shop owners swept their doorsteps and called greetings to neighbors. An elderly man fed cats from a small can he'd brought in his pocket. This was what living looked like. Small, intentional acts of care and connection. Not the elaborate performance of normalcy that my life had become, where everyone pretended we weren't all just waiting for me to die. That evening, I called my oncologist's office in Boston. "Dr. Patterson, this is Claire Morrison. I'm calling from Italy." "Italy? Claire, what are you doing in Italy? You're supposed to be starting your next round of treatment next week." "That's actually why I'm calling. I want to discuss stopping treatment." "Stopping treatment?" "Claire, we've talked about this. The chemotherapy is extending your life." "It's extending my dying, Dr. Patterson. There's a difference." I could hear him typing, probably pulling up my file. "Your last scans showed that while the cancer is still progressing, the rate of progression has slowed significantly. We're buying you valuable time." "Time for what? To feel sicker every day? To watch my husband plan his life without me? To have conversations where everyone pretends I'm not dying when we all know I am?" "Claire, I think you should come in when you get back so we can discuss this properly. These are big decisions, and you shouldn't make them while you're emotional." "I'm not emotional, Dr. Patterson. I'm clear-headed for the first time in 2 years. I'm sitting in a cafe in Tuscany, feeling better than I have since my diagnosis, and I'm wondering why I've been poisoning myself with chemicals instead of living. The chemotherapy is not poison. It's poison that sometimes helps, but in my case, it's just poison. You said yourself that we're not talking about a cure, just buying time. What if I don't want to buy time at the cost of feeling terrible?" Dr. Patterson was quiet for a moment. "What does Marcus think about this?" "Marcus thinks I'm too sick to be in Italy right now. Marcus hasn't asked me how I'm feeling in 6 months. Marcus is not a factor in this decision. I really think you should come in next week as scheduled. We can discuss palliative options that might make you more comfortable while still providing some treatment benefit." "I'll think about it," I said, but I already knew I wouldn't be keeping that appointment. The next morning, I took a bus to a nearby hilltop town that was supposed to have one of the most beautiful views in Tuscany. The bus ride was winding and steep, the kind of journey that would have left me nauseated and exhausted 6 months ago. Today, I felt fine. The town was everything the guidebooks had promised, a cluster of golden stone buildings perched on a hill, with views that stretched to the horizon in every direction. I climbed to the highest point, breathing hard but exhilarated by the effort. From the top, I could see the entire Tuscan countryside spread out below me like a map. Villages dotted the landscape, connected by roads that curved through vineyards and olive groves. In the distance, mountains rose blue and hazy against the sky. My phone rang. "Rachel." "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she said without preamble. "About staying in Italy." "And?" "I think you should do it." This surprised me. Rachel had always been the practical one, the one who made lists and planned for contingencies. "Really?" "I've been thinking about how you sounded yesterday, and how you've sounded for the past 2 years. Yesterday, you sounded like my sister again. You sounded alive." "I feel alive." "Then stay alive. For as long as you can, in whatever way makes you happy." "What about Marcus?" "What about him? He's already moved on, Claire. You're just catching up." "What about my treatment?" "What about it? Is it making you feel better or worse?" "Worse. Much worse." "Then stop it. Come home when you want to come home, not when you're supposed to." After we hung up, I sat on a bench overlooking the valley and thought about what it would mean to simply stay. I had enough money to rent a small apartment for several months. I could take language classes, cooking classes, maybe even writing classes. I could explore every village within a day's travel, taste every wine, learn to identify the herbs growing wild on the hillsides. I could die in a place that made me happy instead of a place where everyone was waiting for me to die. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Jessica mentioned that you seemed upset before you left. I want you to know that you're still my priority. When you get back, we'll focus on spending quality time together." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to understand the psychology of a man who thought his wife wouldn't notice his affair, and then thought mentioning his mistress by name was somehow reassuring. I typed back, "I'm extending my trip indefinitely. We'll talk when I'm ready to talk." His response came immediately. "What do you mean indefinitely? You have treatment scheduled." "I'm canceling my treatment." "Claire, you can't be serious. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." "You're being irrational. Come home and we'll figure this out together." "We are not a we anymore, Marcus. You made that choice months ago." I turned off my phone and put it in my purse. For the first time in 2 years, I was completely unreachable, and it felt like freedom. That evening, I found a small trattoria that wasn't in any guidebook, the kind of place where local families went for Sunday dinner. The owner, a woman about my age named Francesca, seated me at a table by the window and asked in broken English what I would like to eat. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "You let me choose for you? I bring you what is best today?" Perfect. She brought me course after course of simple, perfect food. A salad of tomatoes and mozzarella that tasted like summer. Handmade pasta with a sauce that had probably been simmering all day. Grilled fish that had been caught that morning. Each dish arrived when I was ready for it, with no rush, no hurry, no schedule to keep. "You are enjoying?" Francesca asked, checking on me between courses. "It's the best meal I've ever had." "Ah, this makes me happy. Food should make the heart happy, not just the stomach." When I asked for the check, she waved me away. "Tonight, you are my guest. Tomorrow, you come back, you pay. Tonight, you just enjoy." Walking back to my hotel under stars that seemed brighter than any I'd seen at home, I realized that this was what I'd been looking for without knowing it. A place where people cared about my happiness rather than my prognosis, where I was seen as a person rather than a patient. The next morning, I went to a local real estate office and inquired about short-term rentals. By afternoon, I'd signed a month-to-month lease on a small apartment above a bakery in the village, with windows that looked out over olive groves and a tiny kitchen where I could practice the cooking techniques I was learning. I called Rachel first. "I found an apartment," I said. "I'm staying." "For how long?" "For as long as I feel this good." "And Marcus?" "Marcus can do whatever he wants. He's been doing it anyway." Next, I called my oncologist and formally refused all further treatment. Dr. Patterson tried to argue, but I'd made up my mind. "I want you to understand what you're choosing," he said. "Without treatment, your prognosis is likely 3 to 6 months. With treatment, my prognosis was 6 months of feeling terrible. Without treatment, I might have 3 to 6 months of feeling good. That seems like an easy choice." Finally, I called Marcus. He'd been texting and calling constantly since I'd turned my phone back on, alternating between anger and what he probably thought was concern. "Claire, thank God. I've been worried sick. When are you coming home?" "I'm not coming home, Marcus. I'm staying in Italy." "For how long?" "For as long as I'm alive." "That's ridiculous. You can't just abandon your life here." "What life? The life where I spend every day feeling sick from treatments that aren't working? The life where my husband has moved on with someone else but won't admit it? The life where everyone talks about me like I'm already dead? I don't know what you think you know about Jessica, but I know everything I need to know about Jessica, and about you, and about what you thought our marriage was worth." "Claire, you're being unreasonable. Come home and we'll work this out." "No, Marcus, I'm being reasonable for the first time in years. I'm choosing to spend whatever time I have left in a place that makes me happy. What am I supposed to tell people?" The question was so quintessentially Marcus that I almost laughed. Even in this conversation about my mortality and our marriage, his primary concern was how things would appear to other people. Tell them I'm living my life instead of dying on schedule. I moved into my apartment the next day. It was small but perfect. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a living area with French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the valley. The bakery downstairs filled the space with the smell of fresh bread every morning, and the family who owned it, the Rosses, had already adopted me as their unofficial American daughter. "Bene, bene," Signora Rossi said, helping me arrange the few things I'd bought for the apartment. "This is good for you, living here. Italy, she heals the heart." The first month passed like a dream. I took Italian lessons 3 times a week with a retired professor who taught in his garden. I learned to make bread from Signora Rossi, who was patient with my terrible Italian, and excellent at communicating through gestures and laughter. I explored every village within an hour's bus ride, each one offering new discoveries. A museum of medieval art, a family vineyard where they let me help with the harvest, a hot spring hidden in the hills where locals went to soak away their troubles. I felt better than I had in years. Not good for someone with cancer. Actually good. I was sleeping through the night without pain medication. I was eating with appetite instead of forcing myself to maintain nutrition. I was walking miles every day without exhaustion. Marcus called weekly, each conversation following the same pattern. He would ask when I was coming home. I would say I wasn't. He would argue that I was being irrational, and I would hang up. The calls got shorter each time. "How long can you afford to stay?" Rachel asked during one of our talks. "Longer than I'm likely to live," I said. "The cost of living here is about a third of what it was at home, and I'm not spending anything on medical bills." "Are you seeing any doctors there?" "I saw a general practitioner in the village when I first arrived. He speaks excellent English, trained in London." I told him my situation, and he said he'd be happy to help manage pain or symptoms if they arise, but otherwise he recommended I focus on living well rather than dying slowly. That's a refreshing medical philosophy. Dr. Benedetti says Italians have a different relationship with mortality. They believe in living fully right up until the end, rather than spending years preparing to die. 3 months into my Italian adventure, I got a call that changed everything. "Mrs. Morrison, this is Dr. Patterson's office. Your insurance company is requesting updated medical records for your file. Since you haven't been in for your scheduled appointments, they need documentation of your current condition. I'm not receiving treatment anymore." "Yes, we have that in your file. But they still need a current assessment. Would you be able to come in for a consultation when you return from your trip?" "I'm not returning from my trip." "I'm sorry. I'm not coming back. I'm staying in Italy." There was a pause. "Mrs. Morrison, I think there may be some confusion. You can't just live in Italy indefinitely. You don't have citizenship or... I have a tourist visa that's good for 90 days, which I can renew. I have enough money to support myself. And I have terminal cancer, which means I don't need to plan for a long-term future." "But what about your medical care?" "I'm receiving medical care here when I need it. But mostly, I'm not needing it." After I hung up, I realized that this was probably the first of many calls I'd receive, as the various bureaucratic aspects of my American life began to unravel. Insurance companies would want documentation. Financial institutions would want updates. The various systems that manage dying people would want to keep track of me, but I was no longer interested in being managed. I was interested in living. Dr. Benedetti confirmed what I already knew when I went for my quarterly check-in. "Your weight is stable, your energy is good, your pain levels are minimal," he said, reviewing the simple blood tests he'd ordered. "Whatever you are doing, it is working." "I'm not doing anything except living." "Ah, but living is the most important medicine, no? In America, I think you forget this sometimes. We definitely forget it sometimes." "The body wants to live, Signora Morrison. When we stop fighting it and start supporting it, sometimes remarkable things happen." "Are you saying the cancer is gone?" "I am saying that worry about cancer was making you more sick than cancer itself. Now you are not worried, and your body remembers how to be strong." I thought about this conversation as I walked home through the village, stopping to buy vegetables from the market and chat with neighbors who'd become friends. In America, I'd been a cancer patient who happened to be a person. Here, I was a person who happened to have cancer, and the difference was profound. That evening, Marcus called with news. "I'm flying to Italy," he announced. "This has gone on long enough. You're not thinking clearly, and you need to come home." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, and I'm not coming home. Claire, I've talked to your doctors, to your sister, to everyone who cares about you. We're all worried." "You talked to my doctors? About my private medical information? I'm your husband. I have a right to know what's happening with your health." You lost that right when you decided to plan your life without me in it. I don't know what you think you know, but you're wrong. Jessica is just a friend. Marcus, I really don't care anymore. You can marry Jessica, you can tell people I died, you can do whatever you want, but you can't make me come back to a life that was killing me faster than cancer ever could. I'm flying out on Friday. We'll sort this out in person. Don't. What? Don't come to Italy. You're not welcome here. You can't stop me from visiting Italy. I can stop you from visiting me. And I can make sure you don't know where to find me. The threat was empty. The village was small enough that anyone could find anyone. But it felt good to say it. After Marcus hung up, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine from the vineyard down the road and thought about what his visit would mean. He would arrive full of righteous concern and reasonable arguments about medical care and practical considerations. He would make my Italian adventure seem like a frivolous escape from reality, rather than the most honest thing I'd done in years. But I wasn't the same person who'd left Boston 6 months ago. That woman might have been swayed by guilt and obligation. This woman knew the difference between existing and living. Marcus arrived on a Thursday, 3 days earlier than he'd said. I was at the market when Signora Rossi called me. Claire, there is a man here asking for you. American, very serious. He says he is your husband. Tell him I'm not here. Where are you? I'm at the market, but tell him I'm not here. Ah, capisco. I understand. I tell him you have gone to Roma for the week. When I got back to the apartment, Marcus was gone, but he'd left a note under my door. I know you're here. We need to talk. I'll be at the Hotel Central until Sunday. The Hotel Central was the only hotel in the village, a small family-run place with 12 rooms and a restaurant that served excellent ossobuco. I'd eaten there many times over the past 6 months, and the owners, the Martinellis, had become friends. That evening, I called Signora Martinelli. Ciao, Elena. I wanted to let you know that the American man staying at your hotel is my ex-husband. If he asks about me, I'd prefer that you not share any information. Ah, questo tipo, she said. This type. He is very demanding, very rude. He complains about the room, about the food, about everything. You're much better without him. Gracie, Elena. But Claire, he says you are very sick, that you need to come home for medical treatment. Is this true? It's complicated. But I'm healthier here than I was at home. Bene. You stay here. We take care of you. The next morning, I was having coffee at my usual cafe when Marcus found me. Claire. He stood next to my table, looking out of place in his business casual clothes among the farmers and shopkeepers who made up the morning crowd. Marcus, you're persistent. We need to talk. No, we don't, but since you came all this way, you can talk and I'll listen for 5 minutes. He sat down across from me, signaling the waiter for coffee. You look good, he said, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. I feel good. That's great. But Claire, you can't just live in Italy indefinitely. You have responsibilities at home. What responsibilities? Your medical care, for one thing. Your doctors. My doctors told me I had 6 months to live a year ago. I've stopped treatment and I feel better than I have since my diagnosis. What exactly are they doing for me? They're keeping you alive. No, Marcus. Living in Italy is keeping me alive. Treatment was keeping me dying slowly. Marcus looked around the cafe as if seeking support from the other patrons, most of whom were pointedly ignoring our conversation, while obviously listening to every word. You're being selfish, he said finally. There are people who care about you, people who are worried sick. Name one. What? Name one person who's worried about me, rather than worried about the inconvenience of my not dying on schedule. That's a horrible thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. You weren't worried about me when I was losing weight and couldn't keep food down. You weren't worried about me when I was up all night in pain. You're only worried now because I'm not where you expected me to be. I was worried. I've been worried this whole time. You've been planning your next life this whole time. There's a difference. Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. I know about the emails you found. I figured you did. Jessica and I, it's complicated. No, it's not complicated. It's simple. You decided your wife was dying inconveniently slowly, so you found someone to help you practice being a widower. It wasn't like that. What was it like? It was he struggled for words. You were so sick, and so sad, and everything in our life became about cancer, and death, and medical appointments. I felt like I was dying too, just watching you suffer. So you found someone who made you feel alive? Yes, maybe, I don't know. And now I've found something that makes me feel alive too. Italy isn't a person, Claire, it's a place. You can't build a life with a place. Watch me. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Around us, the cafe continued its morning rhythm, people greeting each other, discussing the weather, sharing news about their families. Normal life, going on as it always had. What am I supposed to do? Marcus asked eventually. Just go home and pretend my wife decided to live in Italy? You could get a divorce. I don't want a divorce. You want to be married to someone who lives on another continent and refuses to see you? I want you to come home. That's not an option. Why not? I looked at him across the small table, this man I'd been married to for 15 years, and tried to remember when I'd last felt genuinely happy in his presence. I couldn't. Because home is the place where everyone was waiting for me to die, and here is the place where I remembered how to live. Marcus flew back to Boston that afternoon. I didn't see him off, didn't wish him a safe flight, didn't promise to reconsider. I spent the day helping Signora Rossi with inventory at the bakery, learning the Italian names for different types of flour, and listening to her stories about her late husband, who had been the baker before their son took over. Love, she said, mixing dough for tomorrow's bread, is not about holding on, is about knowing when to let go. Did you ever let go of anyone? See, once, a man I loved before I met my husband. He wanted me to move to Milano, to leave my family, my village, everything I knew. I thought about it for months. What did you decide? I decided that love should make you more yourself, not less yourself. In Milano, I would have been his woman. Here I was my own woman who chose to love my husband. Do you regret it? Never, because I chose a love that made me bigger, not smaller. That night, I called Rachel to tell her about Marcus's visit. How was it? She asked. Sad, mostly. He looked so out of place here, so uncomfortable with everything. I think he was genuinely shocked that I looked healthy. Are you having any doubts? About staying? No? About the marriage ending? Sometimes. Not because I want to save it, but because it's strange to watch something you thought was permanent just dissolve. You know he's been telling people that you're not thinking clearly because of your illness. Of course he has. I've been telling people that you're thinking clearly for the first time in years. 6 months after Marcus's visit, I received divorce papers via international mail. He was citing irreconcilable differences and my abandonment of the marriage. I signed them without reading the details and mailed them back the same day. A month later, I was officially a single woman living in Italy with terminal cancer who felt better than she had in 5 years. How do you explain it? Dr. Benedetti asked during one of our quarterly check-ins. My latest blood work showed continued stability, and I'd actually gained weight since moving to Italy. I think I was dying of my life, not my cancer, I said. And when I changed my life, my body decided to stick around and see what happened next. This is not scientific, but maybe science is not everything, no? Maybe not. That spring marked 2 years since my diagnosis, 1 year since I'd moved to Italy, and 6 months past the original expiration date my American doctors had given me. I was not just alive but thriving, running a small cooking blog about my Italian adventures and teaching English to local children twice a week. I'd also started dating, tentatively, carefully, but with genuine interest in the possibility of companionship. Giuseppe was a widowed vintner, whose wife had died 3 years earlier. We'd met at the weekly market, where he'd helped me select the best tomatoes and then invited me to visit his vineyard. You are not afraid? He asked one evening as we sat on his terrace, sharing wine and watching the sunset. Of loving again when you know it cannot last long? I used to be afraid of that, I said. But now I think all love is temporary. The question is whether you want to love while you can, or spend your time protecting yourself from loss. Ah, see. My wife, she said something similar before she died. She said, Giuseppe, do not close your heart because mine is stopping. The heart that stays open gets more love, even if it also gets more sadness. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. Like you. 3 years into my Italian life, Rachel came to visit. I met her at the Rome airport, both of us crying as we hugged in the arrivals hall. "You look amazing," she said, holding me at arm's length to examine me. "I mean, you look healthier than you did before your diagnosis." "I feel healthier than I did before my diagnosis." "How is that possible?" "I think I was sick with my life for a long time before I got sick with cancer. The cancer was just more obvious." We spent a week exploring Tuscany together, visiting all my favorite places, and meeting the people who'd become my chosen family. Rachel was charmed by everyone. Signora Rossi, who insisted on teaching her to make bread. The Martinellis, who treated us to a feast at their hotel. Giuseppe, who gave us a private tour of his vineyard and pronounced Rachel molto simpatica. "I understand why you stayed," Rachel said on her last night, as we sat on my balcony sharing a bottle of Giuseppe's wine. "This feels like home in a way that your actual home never did." It is home. The first real home I've had since I was a child. What happens if you get sicker? If the cancer comes back aggressively? Then I'll deal with it. But I'll deal with it here, surrounded by people who care about my happiness, not just my survival. And Giuseppe? Giuseppe knows the situation. We're taking it one day at a time, which is really all any of us can do anyway. "Do you think you'll marry him?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe we'll just love each other for as long as we both shall live, which might be more honest than promising forever." The morning Rachel left, she hugged me goodbye at the bus station and whispered, "I'm so proud of you for choosing yourself." "I'm proud of me too," I said, and realized it was the first time I'd said those words in my entire life. 4 years into my Italian adventure, I published a book about my experience. Too Sick to Travel: How I Found Life by Refusing to Die on Schedule became an unexpected bestseller, particularly among women facing their own mortality or major life transitions. The book tour took me back to the United States for the first time since I'd left. It was strange being in Boston again, seeing the hospital where I'd been treated, driving past the house Marcus and I had shared. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, more confined. Marcus had remarried, as I'd known he would. Jessica had proven more durable than I'd expected, and they seemed genuinely happy together. I felt no bitterness about it. In fact, I was grateful that he'd found someone who could love the person he actually was, rather than the person he thought he should be. Emma, who'd initially been upset about my abandonment of conventional treatment, had become one of my strongest supporters after visiting me in Italy and seeing how dramatically my health had improved. "I thought you were giving up," she told me during a book signing in Chicago. "But you weren't giving up at all. You were just giving up on a life that was making you sick." Sometimes giving up on the wrong things is the only way to hold on to the right things. Are you ever coming back to the States permanently? I don't think so. My life is in Italy now. My home, my work, my love, it's all there. What about when you get older? If you need more medical care? Italy has excellent medical care. And besides, I've learned that the most important factor in my health isn't the sophistication of my treatment. It's whether I wake up every morning excited to be alive. 5 years after leaving Boston, I married Giuseppe in a small ceremony in the village church, surrounded by the community that had become our family. I wore a simple dress I'd bought in the local market, and he wore his father's suit, which had been altered to fit him. The reception was held in the town square, with tables groaning under food that everyone had contributed. "Salute," called Signora Rossi, raising her glass of wine. "To Claire and Giuseppe, who show us that it is never too late to choose love over fear." The crowd cheered, and Giuseppe kissed me as church bells rang across the valley. That night, as we sat on our terrace, his vineyard had become our vineyard. I thought about the woman who'd packed a suitcase in a Boston suburb 5 years ago, convinced she was going to die in a foreign country. She had died, in a way. The woman who'd defined herself by her diagnosis, who'd measured her worth by how well she handled being sick, who'd accepted that other people's comfort was more important than her own happiness, that woman was gone. In her place was someone I actually liked, someone who'd learned that there was a difference between being brave enough to fight death and being brave enough to insist on life. The cancer was still there, would always be there, a permanent resident that I'd learned to live with rather than live in fear of. But it had stopped being the most interesting thing about me. Now I was Giuseppe's wife, Signora Rossi's honorary daughter, a teacher, a writer. A woman who'd figured out that sometimes the best way to save your life is to completely change it. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Saw the wedding photos on Instagram. You look radiant. Dad would be so proud of the woman you've become. I typed back, I'm proud of her too. As Giuseppe and I prepared for bed on our wedding night, I caught sight of myself in the antique mirror in our bedroom. The woman looking back at me was tan from the Italian sun, her hair silver instead of the brown it had been when I was younger, her body marked by scars from surgery and time. But her eyes were bright with contentment, and her smile was the kind that came from deep happiness rather than polite performance. Buonanotte, mia moglie, Giuseppe whispered, taking my hand. Buonanotte, mio marito. Outside our window, the vineyard stretched toward the horizon under a sky full of stars. Somewhere in Boston, Marcus was probably sleeping next to Jessica in the bed I'd once shared with him. Somewhere in the world, other women were receiving devastating diagnoses and making impossible choices about how to spend whatever time they had left. But here, in this room, in this village, in this life I'd built from the ruins of the one I'd left behind, there was only contentment. I'd been too sick to travel, according to the man who'd planned to take my honeymoon with another woman. Instead, I'd taken the trip alone and found everything I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking for it. A home, a love, a way of being in the world that honored both my mortality and my insistence on joy. The woman who'd been too sick to travel had traveled farther than she'd ever imagined possible, not just geographically, but into a version of herself she'd never known existed. And that journey, I realized, as sleep took me in my husband's arms, had been worth every difficult step. Shipakas, Nahal. The morning sickness started on a Tuesday. I was making coffee in our kitchen when a wave of nausea hit me so suddenly that I had to grip the counter to steady myself. Giuseppe found me there, pale and shaking. Amor, what is wrong? I don't know, I just feel... Another wave hit, and I barely made it to the bathroom in time. Giuseppe held my hair back as I was sick. His face creased with worry. We should call Dr. Benedetti. It's probably just something I ate, I said. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't food poisoning. There was something familiar about this particular kind of nausea, something that took me back 20 years to when Rachel and I had been trying to get pregnant at the same time. Claire. Giuseppe's voice was gentle but serious. When was your last period? I looked at him in the mirror, both of us thinking the same impossible thing. That's not possible, I said. I'm 53 years old. I have cancer. I've been through menopause. When was your last period? He repeated. I tried to remember and realized I couldn't. With everything else going on, the wedding, finishing my second book, the wine harvest, I hadn't been paying attention to something I'd assumed was no longer relevant. I don't remember, I admitted. Dr. Benedetti saw us that afternoon, his kind face unreadable as he drew blood and examined me with the thoroughness I'd learned to appreciate about Italian medicine, focused on the whole person rather than just symptoms. We will know for certain in a few hours, he said. But Signora Morrison, Benedetti, I corrected automatically. I'd taken Giuseppe's name. Signora Benedetti, I must ask, is this something you would want, if it is true? Giuseppe and I looked at each other. We talked about many things during our courtship and brief marriage, but children had never come up. It had seemed irrelevant given my age and prognosis. I don't know, I said honestly. I never thought it was a possibility. The cancer medications you took years ago, they can sometimes cause temporary menopause that reverses itself, Dr. Benedetti explained. It is rare, but not unheard of. And if you are pregnant, we will need to consider what this means for your cancer treatment options. I'm not taking any cancer treatment. See, this I know. But pregnancy, it changes everything about the body. Sometimes it can accelerate cancer growth. Sometimes it can slow it. Every case is different. The blood test confirmed what we'd both suspected. I was 12 weeks pregnant. 12 weeks? I stared at the results in disbelief. How did I not know for 3 months? The symptoms can be subtle, especially in older pregnancies, Dr. Benedetti said. And your focus has been on other things. But now we must talk about what you want to do. Giuseppe took my hand. Whatever you decide, I will support. At my age, with my medical history, what are the risks? Dr. Benedetti was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. The risks are significant. For the pregnancy, for your health, for the baby. Down syndrome becomes much more likely after age 50. The physical stress on your body could be substantial. And we do not know how pregnancy hormones might affect your cancer. And if I continue the pregnancy, then we monitor very carefully. We do genetic testing. We prepare for complications. And we hope. What would you do if I were your daughter? I would tell my daughter that life rarely gives us easy choices, only important ones, and that sometimes the most important choice is the one that feels impossible. That night, Giuseppe and I sat on our terrace for hours, talking through options that all seemed equally unthinkable. Terminate a pregnancy I'd never expected to have, or risk both my life and the baby's for a chance at something that might be miraculous or tragic. What do you want? I asked him. I want you to be happy. Everything else is secondary. That's not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. He paused, looking out over the vineyard. My first wife, Elena, she lost 3 pregnancies. We tried for years to have children. It broke something in her each time. And now you have an old woman with cancer who's accidentally pregnant. Now I have the woman I love, carrying a child we made together, and I am terrified and grateful in equal measure. I thought about the woman I'd been when I first came to Italy, convinced I had months to live, focused entirely on my own mortality. That woman would never have considered bringing a child into the world. But the woman I'd become had learned that life was both more fragile and more resilient than she'd ever imagined. I want to try, I said finally. I want to see what happens. Are you certain? No, but I'm certain that I want to choose hope over fear, even if it's terrifying. The next morning, I called Rachel. You're what? She shrieked, loudly enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Pregnant, 12 weeks. How is that possible? I thought you were postmenopausal. Apparently my body had other plans. Claire, are you insane? At your age, with your health issues. I know the risks, Rachel. Do you? Do you really? Because this isn't like deciding to live in Italy or write a book. This is a human life we're talking about. I'm aware of that. There was a long pause. What did Giuseppe say? He said he'd support whatever I decided. And what did you decide? I decided to see what happens. Another pause, longer this time. Okay. If this is what you want, then I'm behind you. But I'm also booking a flight to Italy because you're going to need help, and I'm not letting you do this alone. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You're my sister, and you're about to attempt something that's either miraculous or completely insane. And either way, you need family around. The genetic testing results came back when I was 16 weeks along. Everything looked normal. The baby, a girl, appeared to be developing perfectly. It is remarkable, Dr. Benedetti said, reviewing the ultrasound images. At your age, the statistical probability of a healthy pregnancy is very low. But sometimes the body surprises us. And the cancer? Stable. If anything, slightly improved from your last scans. Pregnancy hormones can sometimes have protective effects against certain types of cancer. We are monitoring closely, but so far everything is encouraging. Giuseppe wept when we saw the ultrasound image of our daughter. I'd expected to feel overwhelmed or frightened, but instead I felt the same sense of rightness I'd experienced when I decided to stay in Italy. This was happening for reasons I didn't understand, but it felt like another piece of the life I was meant to live. What should we name her? Giuseppe asked that night. I don't know, something that reflects hope, maybe? In Italian, we have speranza, it means hope. Speranza Benedetti, I like it. The pregnancy was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not just physically, though the fatigue and nausea were substantial, but emotionally. I found myself confronting fears I'd thought I'd resolved about my mortality and my future. What if I died in childbirth? What if I didn't live to see Speranza grow up? What if I was being selfish, bringing a child into the world when I couldn't guarantee I'd be there to raise her? You are borrowing trouble from tomorrow, Signora Rossi told me one afternoon as we kneaded bread together. At 78, she had become my informal pregnancy advisor, having raised 4 children of her own. What if I don't live to see her graduate from school, get married, have children of her own? What if you do? What if you live to be 90 and spoil her grandchildren? Why do you think the sad possibilities are more likely than the happy ones? Because I have cancer. Sigh, you have cancer. You also have love and community, and a body that has surprised everyone by making a baby at 53. Maybe your cancer is not the most important thing about your story. Rachel arrived when I was 7 months pregnant, taking one look at my swollen belly and immediately bursting into tears. "You're huge," she said, hugging me carefully. "And you're glowing. I can't believe this is actually happening." Sometimes I can't believe it either. She moved into our guest room and immediately began organizing our lives with the efficiency that had made her a successful project manager. She researched pediatricians, interviewed potential nannies, and turned our spare bedroom into a nursery that looked like something from a magazine. "You don't have to do all this," I protested as she assembled what appeared to be the most complicated crib ever designed. "Yes, I do. You're my sister, and this is my niece, and I want her to have everything she needs." "What if?" "Stop." Rachel looked up from the crib instructions. "Just stop. You've spent 5 years proving that your worst-case scenarios don't have to come true. Trust that a little longer." Speranza was born on a Tuesday morning in March, after 18 hours of labor that left me exhausted but exhilarated. She was tiny, just 5 pounds, but perfectly healthy, with Giuseppe's dark hair and what the nurses assured us was my stubborn chin. "She is beautiful," Giuseppe whispered, holding her for the first time. "Piccola miracolo." Little miracle? It seemed exactly right. The first few months were harder than I'd expected. Not just the sleep deprivation and physical recovery, but the constant anxiety about my health. About whether I'd live to see her first birthday, her first steps, her first words. Every oncology appointment filled me with terror that the cancer had returned aggressively, triggered by pregnancy hormones. But each scan came back clear. Each blood test showed stability. Speranza thrived, growing from a tiny, fragile newborn into a robust baby who smiled early and often, as if she understood that her very existence was a cause for celebration. "How do you explain it?" Rachel asked one evening as we watched Giuseppe feed Speranza on the terrace. "The pregnancy, the healthy baby, your stable health?" "I don't explain it," I said. "I just accept it." That's very Zen of you. Or very Italian. Here they have a saying. Non cercare di capire tutto. Don't try to understand everything. Some things you just experience. When Speranza was 6 months old, I got a call that changed our family in an unexpected way. "Mrs. Benedetti? This is Janet Morrison from Boston Children's Hospital. We have a patient here, a 17-year-old named Emma Carson, who's been asking to speak with you." "I'm sorry, I don't know anyone by that name." "She read your book. She has osteosarcoma, and she's been refusing treatment. Her parents found your book in her room, and she's been telling them that if you can choose to stop treatment and live in Italy, she can choose to stop treatment too." My heart sank. "Oh no! Her parents are desperate. They're hoping you might talk to her, help her understand that your situation was different. Of course. Can you put her on the phone?" Emma's voice was young but determined, with the kind of fierce certainty that I recognized from my own decision to stay in Italy. "Everyone keeps telling me I have to fight," she said. "But I'm tired of fighting. I want to live, like you did. Emma, can I ask you something? When you imagine your life without treatment, what do you see yourself doing?" "I don't know, traveling, maybe, seeing the world before I die." "And with treatment?" "Being sick all the time, missing my senior year, watching my parents cry every day." "I understand. Can I tell you about the difference between my situation and yours?" "I guess." When I stopped treatment, I was 52 years old. I'd already lived a full adult life. I'd been married, had a career, experienced love and loss and everything that comes with being a grown-up. You're 17. You haven't had those experiences yet. So when I chose to stop treatment, I was choosing quality over quantity of time I'd already lived. When you choose to stop treatment, you're giving up time you haven't lived yet. Time that might include falling in love, traveling the world, maybe even having children of your own. But what if the treatment doesn't work? What if it does? Emma was quiet for a moment. Did you ever regret stopping treatment? No, but I also didn't have your chances of survival. My cancer was terminal, yours isn't. How do you know that? Because you're 17, and 17-year-old bodies are incredibly good at healing. Because osteosarcoma treatment has improved dramatically in recent years. Because you have decades ahead of you that are worth fighting for. What if I fight and still die? What if you fight and live? What if you live to be 90 and tell your great-grandchildren about the time you beat cancer when you were 17? We talked for another hour, and by the end of the conversation, Emma had agreed to at least discuss treatment options with her doctors again. "Thank you," her mother said when Emma handed the phone back. "We've been so scared." She's a remarkable young woman, but she's also 17, and 17-year-olds sometimes need help seeing the bigger picture. Would you be willing to stay in touch with her? I think it would help to have someone who understands what it's like to face this kind of decision. Over the next year, Emma and I developed an email correspondence that became one of the most meaningful relationships in my life. She went through treatment, successfully, as I'd hoped, while I navigated new motherhood with a baby who seemed determined to make up for the statistical improbability of her existence by being the happiest child in Tuscany. "She reminds me of you," Giuseppe said one morning as we watched Speranza attempt to crawl across our bedroom floor. "Very determined, very stubborn, very sure that the world should work the way she wants it to." Is that a good thing or a bad thing? In this family? Definitely a good thing. Speranza's first birthday party was held in the village square, just as our wedding had been. It seemed like the entire town showed up to celebrate the baby, who'd arrived against all odds and become everyone's unofficial goddaughter. "Salute to Speranza," called Mayor Toriani, raising his glass. "Who teaches us that miracles come in small packages?" As I watched my daughter, a phrase I still couldn't quite believe, smash her birthday cake with the focused intensity of a scientist conducting an experiment, I thought about all the ways my life had defied every prediction. I was supposed to have died 3 years ago. Instead, I was watching my 1-year-old discover the joy of cake destruction, while my husband sang Italian lullabies and my sister documented every moment with approximately 3,000 photographs. The cancer was still there, would always be there, but it had somehow learned to coexist with pregnancy hormones, motherhood stress, and the general chaos of raising a child in your 50s. My latest scans showed the same stable progression they'd shown for years, as if my body had found an equilibrium it was determined to maintain. "Any regrets?" Rachel asked that evening as we cleaned up cake remains and deflated balloons. "About which part? Getting cancer, moving to Italy, getting remarried, or having a baby at 53? Any of it. All of it." I looked around our terrace, where Giuseppe was singing softly to a sleepy Speranza, while fairy lights twinkled in the olive trees, and the sound of laughter drifted up from the village below. The only thing I regret is how long it took me to figure out that I was allowed to choose happiness. What do you mean? I mean I spent most of my first 50 years waiting for permission to want what I wanted, to prioritize my own joy. The cancer diagnosis was terrible, but it also gave me permission to stop caring what other people thought I should do with my life. And now? Now I know that I never needed permission in the first place. 2 years later, Emma Carson came to visit us in Italy. She was 19. Cancer-free and halfway through college, with plans to become an oncology social worker. "I want to help other kids going through what I went through," she told us over dinner. "But I also want to help them understand that fighting doesn't mean suffering unnecessarily, and choosing to live doesn't mean giving up on treatment." "You've learned the difference between surviving and living," Giuseppe said. "I learned it from Claire. She showed me that choosing hope doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means finding a way to live fully within whatever reality you have." Speranza, now a chattering 3-year-old with decided opinions about everything, appointed herself Emma's tour guide, dragging her around the village and introducing her to everyone as, "My friend Emma, who was sick but got better. Out of the mouths of babes, Rachel laughed. She doesn't know any other way to understand it, I said. To her, cancer is just something that happens to people sometimes, like breaking a bone or getting a cold. It's not this huge, terrifying thing that defines your entire existence. Is that healthy? I think it might be the healthiest perspective possible. Emma stayed for a week, and by the time she left, she'd helped me articulate something I'd been struggling to put into words for years. You didn't beat cancer, she said as Giuseppe drove us to the airport. You learned to live with it. There's a difference. What's the difference? Beating cancer implies it was a war you won. Living with it means you found a way to have a full life that happens to include cancer, instead of a cancer story that occasionally includes life. After Emma left, I spent a lot of time thinking about her observation. She was right. I hadn't defeated cancer so much as I'd changed my relationship with it. Instead of letting it be the central organizing principle of my existence, I'd made it one element among many. Wife, mother, writer, teacher, woman who chose gelato over frozen yogurt, and sunset over sunrise, and love over fear whenever possible. My fourth book, Small Miracles, Motherhood After 50, was published when Speranza was 4. The book tour was shorter this time. I couldn't be away from her for more than a few days, but the response was overwhelming. Apparently, there were a lot of women who felt inspired by the idea that life could surprise you with gifts you'd never thought to ask for. Do you ever worry about her future? A reader asked during a signing in Rome. About what happens if your cancer comes back aggressively. I worry about lots of things, I said. I worry about whether she'll be confident enough to stand up for herself but kind enough to care about others. I worry about whether she'll find work she loves, and people who love her back. I worry about climate change and social media, and whether I'm raising her to be resilient enough for whatever world she'll inherit. But the cancer is just one of many things I can't control. I can't control whether she'll get sick herself someday, or whether she'll face heartbreak or disappointment, or any of the other challenges that come with being human. What I can control is how much love and security and joy I give her while I have the chance. How do you maintain that perspective? I remember that worrying about the future steals happiness from the present. And Speranza deserves a mother who's present for her childhood, not one who's constantly preparing for tragedy. That night, back in our hotel room, I called Giuseppe to say goodnight to Speranza. Mama, she said excitedly. I helped Papa make pasta today, and I only dropped a little bit on the floor. That sounds wonderful, Piccola. What else did you do? We visited Nonna Rossi, and she let me help with the bread. And Papa read me 3 stories, but I was still not sleepy, so we looked at the stars. Which stars did you see? All of them. Papa showed me the one that looks like a big spoon. I'm the one that looks like a belt, and he said that you can see the same stars from Rome, so we're looking at the same stars right now. After we hung up, I stood on my hotel balcony and looked up at the night sky, finding the constellations Giuseppe had shown our daughter. Somewhere in Tuscany, the two of them were probably looking up at the same stars, and the thought filled me with a contentment so complete it felt like a physical weight in my chest. This was what I'd been too sick to travel toward 5 years ago. Not just Italy, but this life, this love, this impossible family we'd created against all odds and medical probabilities. Marcus had been right, in a way. I had been too sick to travel to the life he'd imagined for us, the careful, contained existence where we managed my dying with dignity and minimal disruption. I'd been too sick for that kind of traveling. But I'd been exactly the right amount of sick to travel toward this. A life big enough to hold cancer and joy, mortality and motherhood, endings and beginnings all at once. The next morning, I flew home to Tuscany, where Giuseppe and Speranza met me at the airport with signs they'd made together. Welcome home, Mama, decorated with drawings of stars and pasta and hearts. Did you miss us? Speranza asked, launching herself into my arms. Every single minute, I said, and meant it. We missed you, too, Giuseppe said, kissing me. The house was too quiet without your laughter. As we drove through the Tuscan countryside toward our village, Speranza chattering about everything that had happened while I was gone, I thought about all the different versions of this homecoming I might have had. The one where I'd returned to Boston to die surrounded by people who loved the memory of who I used to be. The one where I'd never left at all, spending my final years as a gracious invalid who made everyone else's grief easier to bear. Instead, I was returning to a life that had exceeded every dream I'd been brave enough to dream. In a place that had taught me the difference between existing and living. With people who loved me not despite my complications, but because of my whole, messy, improbable story. "Mama," Speranza said from her car seat, "when I grow up, can I write books like you? You can write books, or paint pictures, or build bridges, or discover new planets, or do anything else that makes you happy. What if I want to do everything? Then you'll have to live a very long life to fit it all in. Will you live a long life too?" Giuseppe caught my eye in the rearview mirror, both of us aware that this was the question that lived underneath every plan we made, every promise we offered, every hope we allowed ourselves to entertain. "I'm going to live as long as I can, as fully as I can," I said. "And whatever time I have, I want to spend it loving you and Papa and our beautiful life together." "That sounds good," she said, satisfied with an answer that would have terrified me 5 years ago with its lack of guarantees. But I'd learned that guarantees were overrated. What mattered was showing up fully for whatever time you had, choosing love over fear whenever possible, and remembering that sometimes the most important journey was the one that took you toward the person you were always meant to become. The woman who'd been too sick to travel had traveled farther than anyone had imagined possible, not just geographically, but into a version of herself that was brave enough to choose joy, strong enough to rebuild from scratch, and wise enough to know that the best adventures were the ones you never saw coming. As our car crested the hill that revealed our village spread out below us, golden in the afternoon light, I felt the deep satisfaction of someone who'd found her way home, not just to a place, but to a life that fit her like skin. It had taken cancer, divorce, exile, and the statistical impossibility of late-in-life motherhood to get here. But every difficult step had been worth it for this moment. Coming home to a daughter who believed in endless possibilities, and a husband who taught me that love could be both passionate and peaceful, to a community that had welcomed a dying American woman and watched her bloom into someone none of them had expected. Too sick to travel, Marcus had said, shied. He'd been wrong about everything except the destination. Shied. Speranza was 10 when she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mama, why don't I look like you or Papa?" We were sitting in our garden, where she was supposed to be doing homework, but had instead become fascinated by the family of cats that lived in our olive grove. It was the kind of golden afternoon that made Tuscany famous, and I'd been reading nearby, enjoying the peaceful domesticity of a Saturday in our village. "What do you mean, tesoro?" "My friend Sophia. She looks just like her mama. Same eyes, same nose. And Marco looks exactly like his papa, like a little copy. But I don't look like either of you." I set down my book and looked at my daughter, my miracle, my impossible gift, who was indeed a beautiful blend of features that didn't obviously belong to either Giuseppe or me. She had Giuseppe's olive skin and dark hair, but her eyes were a shade of green neither of us possessed. Her bone structure was delicate in a way that reminded me of my own mother, but her hands were long and elegant like Giuseppe's. "Sometimes children look more like their grandparents or aunts and uncles," I said carefully. "Genetics can be surprising, but Sophia's Nana showed me pictures of when she was little, and Sophia looks exactly the same. And you've shown me pictures of you when you were little, and I don't look like that at all." Speranza had inherited more than just Giuseppe's looks. She'd also inherited his persistence and my analytical mind. This conversation was inevitable. I just hoped it would come later. "Tesoro, come sit with me." She abandoned her homework completely and curled up beside me on the garden bench, the way she had when she was small and needed comfort. "You know how sometimes there are things about our family that are different from other families? Like how you were already old when you had me? Like that, yes. And like how Mama has a sickness that she's learned to live with, but other mamas don't have. And like how we speak 3 languages at home, but most families only speak 1. Exactly. Well, there's something else that makes our family special and different." Speranza looked at me with the serious expression she wore when she was trying to solve a puzzle. "What is it?" "You know how Papa and I love each other very much, and how we both love you more than anything in the world. See." Well, sometimes when two people love each other and want to have a baby, they need help from doctors to make that happen. And sometimes that help comes from other people who want to help families be created. What kind of help? I took a deep breath. Giuseppe and I had discussed this conversation many times, knowing it would come eventually. We decided on honesty, age-appropriate but complete. When you were created, Papa and I needed help from a woman who donated an egg, like a seed, that helped make you. So while Papa is your biological father, and I carried you in my body and gave birth to you, some of your DNA came from someone else. Speranza was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the same thoughtfulness she applied to everything else. So I have 3 parents? You have 2 parents who love you and raise you every day. Papa and me. And you have a biological mother who helped create you but isn't part of your daily life. Do you know her? We know a little bit about her. She was a young woman who wanted to help families like ours. She was healthy, kind, and intelligent. But we don't know her personally. Why didn't you tell me before? Because you were too little to understand. And because we wanted you to feel secure in our love before we explained the more complicated parts of how you came to be. Speranza leaned against me, thinking, am I supposed to feel sad about this? You're supposed to feel however you feel about it. There's no right or wrong way to react to this kind of news. I don't feel sad, she said finally. I feel curious, like there's a mystery to solve. What kind of mystery? Like, what does she look like? Does she like to read books like I do? Is she good at math? Does she have other children? Those are all very natural questions to have. And someday, when you're older, if you want to try to find answers to some of them, Papa and I will help you. But I don't need to worry about it now? You don't need to worry about anything. You are our daughter, completely and forever. Nothing about how you were created changes how much we love you, or how much you belong in this family. Speranza nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Can I tell Sophia? She's always bragging about how she looks exactly like her mama. Now I can tell her that I have mystery DNA. I laughed, struck by how perfectly this response captured my daughter's personality, practical, curious, and completely untroubled by things that might devastate other children. You can tell anyone you want to tell, whenever you're ready. It's your story, and you get to decide who to share it with. That evening, after Speranza had gone to bed, Giuseppe and I sat on our terrace with wine and the comfortable silence of 2 people who'd learned to weather unexpected conversations together. How do you think she took it? He asked. Better than I expected. She's more interested in the scientific aspects than the emotional ones. She is very practical, our daughter. She gets that from you. And the curiosity from you. And the ability to adapt to surprising news from both of us. I smiled, thinking about all the surprising news our family had weathered over the years. Speranza's very existence had been the first surprise, but hardly the last. There had been Giuseppe's decision to expand his vineyard, which had turned into an unexpected second career for me as his business partner. There had been my book becoming a bestseller in 6 countries, leading to speaking engagements and consulting work I'd never anticipated. There had been Rachel's divorce and subsequent move to Italy, where she'd opened a small art gallery in the neighboring village and become part of our extended chosen family. And through it all, my health had remained stable in ways that continued to baffle my doctors. Not cured. The cancer was still there, would always be there, but managed, controlled, coexisting with my life rather than dominating it. Do you think she'll want to find her biological mother someday? Giuseppe asked. Maybe. Probably. She's too curious not to want to know eventually. Are you prepared for that? I think so. I mean, I'm grateful to that woman every day. She made it possible for us to have Speranza. If they met someday, I'd want to thank her. You wouldn't be jealous? Of what? Speranza knows who her real parents are. We're the ones who've been here for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every proud moment, and every difficult day. Biology is just biology. Love is what makes a family. The next morning, I was making breakfast when Speranza appeared in the kitchen with a serious expression and a notebook. Mama, I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday. Oh? I want to write a letter. To whom? To my biological mother. To thank her. I paused in my coffee making, touched by the generosity of this impulse. What would you want to say? I want to tell her that I'm happy and healthy, and that Mama and Papa love me very much. And I want to tell her about our life here, so she knows that what she did made something beautiful. That sounds like a lovely letter, tesoro. Will you help me with the English? I want to write it in English, in case she doesn't speak Italian. We spent the morning working on the letter together, Speranza dictating while I helped with spelling and grammar. The final version was simple, honest, and completely her. Dear biological mother. My name is Speranza Benedetti, and I am 10 years old. My mama told me yesterday about how you helped create me, and I wanted to write to thank you. I live in a village in Tuscany with my mama and papa, who love me very much. We have a vineyard and olive trees, and I speak Italian, English, and a little French. I like to read books, especially mysteries, and I'm learning to play the violin. My favorite food is my Nonna Rossi's bread with honey, and my favorite thing to do is help Papa with the grapes during harvest time. My mama was very sick when I was created, and the doctor said she probably couldn't have babies. But you helped make it possible, and now I'm here. Mama says that makes you very special and generous. I want you to know that I'm happy and healthy, and that I understand why you helped my parents. I hope you're happy too, wherever you are. Maybe someday we'll meet, and I can thank you in person. But for now, I just wanted you to know that what you did made a whole family possible. Thank you for giving me life, and thank you for giving my parents the chance to be a family. With love and gratitude, Speranza Benedetti. We can't mail this letter, I explained as she read it over. We don't have her address, and the clinic has privacy rules about protecting donors' identities. I know, but I wanted to write it anyway. Sometimes it's important to say things, even if the person can't hear them yet. Another piece of wisdom from my remarkable daughter, who seemed to understand instinctively that some acts of gratitude were about the giver rather than the receiver. I folded the letter carefully and put it in the small wooden box where we kept Speranza's special things. Her first drawings, her baby bracelet from the hospital, school awards, and now this letter to a woman she might never meet, but whose generosity had made her existence possible. 2 weeks later, I got a call that brought the past rushing back in ways I hadn't expected. Claire, this is Dr. Patterson's office. I know it's been several years since you were our patient, but we have an unusual situation, and we're hoping you might be able to help. What kind of situation? We have a patient, a young woman named Sarah Chen, who's in a similar situation to what yours was. She's 34, recently diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, married but no children yet. She's been asking to speak with you. How did she hear about me? Your book. She's read it several times, and she's considering stopping treatment and traveling, like you did. Her husband is not supportive of this idea. The familiar pang of recognition hit me. Another woman being told she was too sick for the life she wanted. Another husband who thought he knew better than his wife what she needed. Of course I'll talk to her. Can you give her my number? Sarah called that evening, her voice shaky but determined. I'm sorry to bother you, she began. I know you don't know me, but I've read your book about 100 times. And I feel like maybe you're the only person who would understand. Tell me what's happening. I was diagnosed 6 months ago. The oncologist says I have maybe a year, possibly 2 with aggressive treatment. My husband thinks I should spend that time fighting as hard as possible, but I want to live, really live, not just survive. What does living look like to you? We always talked about traveling to Japan for our honeymoon, but we kept putting it off. First it was saving money, then it was work, then it was the right time, and now David says I'm too sick to travel, that we should focus on treatment and spend whatever time I have left close to medical care. How are you feeling right now? Tired from the chemo, but not terrible. Definitely well enough to travel. But David acts like I'm already dying, like I should be planning my funeral instead of planning a trip. Sarah, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you feel like David sees you as a person who happens to have cancer? Or as a cancer patient who happens to be a person? There was a long silence. The second one, she said finally. Ever since the diagnosis, I feel like I disappeared, and all that's left is my disease. I know that feeling. How did you deal with it? I stopped letting other people's fear dictate my choices. It was the hardest thing I ever did, but also the best. But what if he's right? What if I collapse in Tokyo and die in some foreign hospital? What if you collapse in Boston and die in a familiar hospital? Sarah, you're going to die from this disease no matter where you are. The question is whether you want to spend your remaining time doing things that make you feel alive, or doing things that make other people feel like they're helping. Did your husband try to stop you? Yes. He thought I was being reckless and selfish. How did you get past that? I realized that his fear was about his loss, not my life. He wanted me to die in a way that was convenient for his grief, not in a way that was meaningful for my living. We talked for over an hour, and by the end of the conversation, Sarah had decided to book the trip to Japan with or without David's support. Thank you, she said. I was starting to think maybe I was crazy for wanting this. You're not crazy, you're brave. And bravery often looks like craziness to people who are too frightened to choose what they want. 3 months later, I got a postcard from Tokyo showing Mount Fuji at sunrise. On the back, Sarah had written, "You were right. This is living. David came with me after all. Turns out he was more afraid of losing me before I died than he was of me dying somewhere beautiful. Thank you for helping me choose courage over fear." I showed the postcard to Speranza, who studied the mountain thoughtfully. Mama, why do people think sick people can't travel? Because they're afraid. When someone you love is sick, it feels safer to keep them close, even if that doesn't make them happy. But you traveled when you were sick, and it made you better. It made me happy, which is a kind of better. Will you take me to see Mount Fuji someday? If that's something you want to do, we'll find a way to make it happen. Good. I want to see all the beautiful places in the world. That's an excellent goal for a life. That summer, we did travel to Greece, where Giuseppe had distant cousins who ran a small hotel on one of the islands. It was Speranza's first time seeing the ocean, and she was enchanted by everything. The white buildings against the blue sky, the taste of fresh octopus, the sound of waves against the rocks. The water goes on forever, she said, standing at the edge of the sea. It makes me feel very small, but also very big at the same time. How do you mean? Small because the ocean is so huge that I'm just a tiny speck, but big because I'm part of something that goes on forever. Giuseppe and I exchanged glances over her head, continually amazed by the depth of our daughter's observations about the world. That's a very wise way to think about it, Giuseppe said. In Italy, we have a saying, "Siamo tutti una goccia nell'oceano, ma senza ogni goccia, non ci sarebbe l'oceano." What does that mean? It means we are all one drop in the ocean, but without each drop there would be no ocean. So I'm important even though I'm small? You're important because you're part of something bigger than yourself, but also because you're completely unique. There's never been another drop exactly like you, and there never will be again. That evening, as we sat on the hotel terrace watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I felt the deep contentment that had become familiar over the years, the sense of a life fully lived, fully appreciated, fully present to its own beauty. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "How's Greece? Are you wearing sunscreen? Are you drinking enough water? Are you resting enough?" I laughed and typed back, "I'm fine. The vacation is perfect, and yes, I'm taking care of myself." Good, because Speranza needs her mama to stick around for many more adventures. I plan to. And I did plan to, though I'd learned not to take any future for granted. The cancer was still there, would always be there, but it had settled into something like détente with the rest of my body. My latest scans showed the same stable disease they'd shown for years, and my energy levels remained surprisingly good for someone who was technically terminal. "It is remarkable," Dr. Benedetti had said at my last appointment. "Medically, I cannot explain it, but sometimes the body knows things that medicine does not understand." Are you saying I might actually beat this thing? I am saying that you have already beaten it, in all the ways that matter. You have had 8 years since your diagnosis, 8 years of living fully. You have created a family, written books, helped other people, built a life that brings you joy. If the cancer disappeared tomorrow, would your life be different? I thought about this question as I watched Speranza build sandcastles with the intense focus she brought to everything she cared about. No, I said. I think I'm already living the life I want. Then you have won the only victory that matters. On our last day in Greece, Speranza found a piece of sea glass on the beach, frosted green, worn smooth by years of waves. It's beautiful, she said, holding it up to the light. The ocean broke it, but then it made it beautiful. That's a good metaphor for a lot of things in life. Like you, Mama. You got broken by the cancer, but then you became more beautiful. How do you mean? Before you got sick, you lived in Boston with that other man, and you were unhappy. The sickness broke that life, but then you came to Italy and found Papa and had me. The breaking made space for better things, out of the mouths of babes. My 10-year-old daughter had just articulated something it had taken me years to understand, that sometimes what looks like destruction is actually transformation, that endings can be beginnings in disguise. You're right, Tesoro. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us make space for the best things we never knew were possible. Like how the sea glass can't become beautiful until it gets broken first. Exactly like that. She slipped the piece of sea glass into her pocket. Another treasure for the wooden box, where she kept the things that mattered most to her. Years later, when people would ask Speranza about her childhood, she would tell them about the wooden box filled with memories. A letter to a stranger who helped create her. A piece of sea glass from Greece. Pressed flowers from the vineyard. Ticket stubs from trains that carried them to new adventures. But mostly, she would tell them about her mother, the woman who'd been told she was too sick to travel, and who'd spent the rest of her life proving that the only journey worth taking was the one toward joy. Claire lived to see Speranza graduate from university, marry a kind man who made her laugh, and welcome her own children into the world. She lived to celebrate her 70th birthday, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she'd never expected to have. She lived long enough to understand that survival had never been the point. The point had always been learning how to live. When she finally did die, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73, the village mourned not a cancer patient who'd defied the odds, but a woman who'd taught them all that courage looked different for everyone, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was pack a suitcase and travel toward the life you actually wanted. The end.